accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Hey Green Lantern fans, you're listening to the podcast of OA, episode number 188. I'm your co-host Myron Rumsey, and I'm joined by our good friend Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, February is almost over with, and March is coming. And you know what March means? Snyder Cut time.
It is. I'm getting more and more ready as the days tick by.
It's interesting. There was an article, I don't know if you read it, but there's an article that just came out on Vanity Fair, and it was kind of talking about the history of the Snyder Cut and kind of how it got to release and some of the troubles that took place on the set. Did you read it at all?
Oh, yeah. It was really, really good. It was a really, really good in-depth article. Not so much just about the Snyder Cut itself, but more about how Snyder, some of the stuff he had to deal with, and it was really enlightening. And I think a lot of people should look for it and read it.
It was good. It was good. Now, the one thing that everybody's kind of, their eyes kind of popped out of their heads a little bit about was there was a comment that was made that said that he has reshot the ending with a hero cameo that will blow hardcore fans' minds. So the $1 million question is who is it? And a lot of us are hoping it's Green Lantern. So what are your thoughts? Do you think it's going to be a Green Lantern? Do you think it's going to be something different?
Well, I mean, my top pick, oddly enough, is not Green Lantern, because I'm hoping that Green Lantern, maybe he has a couple appearances in the movie throughout. I don't know. But my pick that I put out there was Highfather.
Oh, that's a neat pick. That's really a neat pick.
Well, you got to think, I don't know. I mean, that's really, really, really like a long shot. But like hardcore fans' minds, I mean, to me, yeah, Green Lantern would, I mean, I guess that would attract a lot of hardcore fans' minds, but that's already the preconceived notion that there's going to be some kind of Green Lantern reference or presence in this film. And I just took it as in, okay, so hardcore fan minds, I wonder what he's going for here. And I just thought outside the box. And I was like, that'd be really, really cool if Highfather appeared, and at the end or something. And, that kind of opens it up to your interpretation on what they could do following that Snyder Cut, expand on it, because a lot of people are speculating whether this is going to be like kind of like the break point between those type of movies and where I guess DC is going in the future. I don't know. I don't know what kind of direction they have. And I figured maybe with a Highfather showing up, that could be an interpretation to the New Gods movie that's supposed to be coming out at some point. It could lead into that. I don't know. But that's my pick. We'll see.
I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know how much they're going to add to it. I know they filmed some new stuff, but not a lot of new stuff. So I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen, obviously. And, my heart would love there to be some Green Lantern in it. But a part of me is really thinking that it's going to be Martian Manhunter, because we kind of already have been told that Martian Manhunter was there, but in his civilian presentation, his civilian mode, and that apparently they did some stuff with mocap to use Martian Manhunter. So I wouldn't at all be surprised if that's what we get. That to me is the odds-on thing if I'm playing the numbers. If I'm a betting man. Right. But my heart would really like it to be a Hal Jordan appearance. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. We don't have too much longer of a wait.
You saw Ryan Reynolds refuted it, right?
Yeah, it kills me. I don't know why anybody put any credence in the thought that he might be in it in the first place. Warner Brothers doesn't want him in it. He doesn't want to be in it. And quite frankly, most of the fans don't want him in it. So that's fine by me.
That was ridiculous. That started, and I was like, that was funny, because that was that day I texted you about the whole Green Lantern was trending. I was like, oh my gosh, man. When's the last time Green Lantern trended?
It's crazy because people put too much credence in some of these clickbait sites, and they put stuff out there just to get you to come to their site, and they really don't have the credibility. And I'm not saying that I do. I'm not. I'm not the one out there saying these kind of things. But you've got sites out there like We Got This Clickbait Covered, and some of the other ones, and you've got some people who have a big following on YouTube, and she has a lot of people who follow her, and she's not exactly the most accurate person either, despite what you might think. Wow. So I wasn't at all surprised. I was just like, can we just get the Ryan Reynolds rumors over with and out of here? Because I would like to move on. And I think everybody else wants to move on. It's been 10 years. He wasn't the worst part about the movie. That's for sure. Sure, his career took a bit of a ding from that and R.I.P.D., which did worse than Green Lantern did. But he got a whole marriage out of it and a family. And so I think he had to just shut his mouth and move on and let us all move on. If you don't want to, if you just...
He found Deadpool as his character. That
right.
Fits his personality, fits his profile. Rock on, go with your bad self, have fun with Deadpool.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, I moved on from it. I couldn't even tell you the last time I saw that movie.
Yeah, I'll watch it sometimes. It's a guilty pleasure just to see Green Lantern on live action, and I really like to watch it more for the OS scenes and seeing the various takes on different Green Lantern characters. I love that stuff. I do like the score of the film, those kind of things. Ryan Reynolds was not the worst thing about that movie. I thought he did a serviceable job as Hal, but we all know that he wasn't the director's first choice. The director did not make it easy on Ryan Reynolds, and so it created tension on the set. I'm sure Ryan didn't turn in his best performance. It is what it is. It's 10 years in the past. I'm glad to move on, and I'd like to see where they're going to go next with Green Lantern and where is it going to go. Now, speaking of Hal, one of the comments we keep hearing from people, and people keep asking me is, where's Hal going to show up in this new DC universe? When's he going to be here? When are we going to hear about something about Hal? And my feeling has been the Morrison series is still going on. And, after we've talked about this most recent issue, we know that he's kind of setting up either this meta story or this subplot about the Guardians not necessarily wanting Hal around because of the fact that he represents too much force of will, if you will. And, they wouldn't want to ruin that story if there's a chance that Hal might get retired. They don't want to ruin that plot point. So I can understand why we're not hearing anything there. I think we're going to hear something in the next solicitations for June because they will come out after the last issue of the Morrison run. So if we're going to hear anything, we'll hear it after that and maybe in those solicitations. But over on the Word Balloon podcast, and if you haven't listened to that show, John Suntress has a lot of creator interviews. Most of them are comics based, but there's other pop culture interviews. But it's basically an interview show. So this guy gets interviews like nobody's business. And he had Josh Williamson on not too long ago. It was earlier this month. And he's one of the architects behind DC's Infinite Frontier, and he seems to be one of these up and coming big talents for DC.
Well, he was excellent on The Flash.
Yeah, he was good in The Flash. And so from what I've heard, he's going to be one of the big architects moving forward. And he was asked by John Suntress a bunch of questions, and a lot of them were questions that were submitted by listeners about DC's new direction, where's it going, those kind of things. And one of the questions that came up near the 2/3, 3/4 of the way mark of the episode was somebody asked about Hal. And Josh Williamson said there are plans. He would not say what those plans are because one of the comments that he made was, I refuse to comment about a project I'm not working on because I don't want to spoil anybody else's thunder or any anticipation. So if there's plans, they're not plans with Josh Williamson writing them, that's for sure. And we don't know what those plans are. There may not be any real plans beyond what goes on in the Morrison run. But I think, knowing that the story for Future State number 2 changed for Hal, and it stopped being Hal without a ring and partnering up with Green Arrow to figure out how life moves on, it was a very different story. And it was Robert Venditti putting Hal right back in the action. So who knows what's going to happen? I, as much as I'm disappointed that we're not getting an announcement yet, I'm a little more hopeful we're going to hear something pretty soon.
I mean, they can't just, I don't know. He's a top tier character, so I don't see them just pushing them off to the side, not giving them a place to land. I mean, I just find that hard to believe that they would make that kind of decision. I mean, maybe, maybe not, but then again, if you think about it like this, I mean, this is off topic with Green Lantern, but there's that rumor now that J.J. Abrams is going to do the Man of Steel movie or the next Superman, and now there's a rumor that Val Zod it might be the Superman of that movie, which is an African American character. So I don't know, maybe with Hal Jordan, I don't know, maybe he takes a back seat to some of these other characters, and maybe that's what the writers are doing to see how it's going to be received. I mean, you and I both know that when these people make these books, I mean, they play with the fans more than they do anything else, because you get cryptic messages like Josh Williams says in a podcast, and it's like, I understand that they don't want to reveal big plans and stuff like that. I get it, and I understand that he probably didn't want to reveal what they were doing because he didn't want to take the thunder away from the person who maybe is or isn't working on a project that involves Hal Jordan. But at the same time, if you leave your fans in the dark, yes, you may not lose a lot of them, but you start losing them shortly. I mean, nobody wants to wait around to see, while they're not writing about Hal Jordan, why should I read this book? There's probably a lot of Kyle Rayner fans that feel the same way, and Guy Gardner, Simon Baz for that matter. They won't read the book because those guys aren't in it. So those fans get pushed to the side. Whereas then you don't have a collective anymore. If you got a Green Lantern Corp book, I mean, you got everybody in there, and make all your top players, the key components of the Green Lantern Corps, your Howls, your Kyles, and all that. At least then you're appeasing to the masses, and be fair about your writing. I don't know. I think that's a better marketing approach if you have a group of characters that like this particular team.
Right. Well, one of the comments that he did make that I thought was really a good observation is that they're not going to announce everything at once, because then you get all of that PR out there at once, and then people don't have anything else to look forward to. So they like to space it out so that you're getting, hype for each individual book and nothing's getting lost in the mix. And I can kind of understand that.
That makes sense. I mean, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah. So I guess when you think about the Morrison run still being ongoing, you wouldn't want to announce a new series while that book is still going. I get it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair.
And in terms of the movies and stuff, we know that there's been a Green Lantern Corps movie in development for some time now, and the last we heard about it was that Jeff Johns was supposed to turn his script in December, January timeframe. But knowing all of the stuff that's going on with Jeff Johns right now, maybe maybe we need to let things cool down a little bit before we go forward, because his character's been taking a lot of knocks right now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and he was. I don't know. I just remember back when he was writing Green Lantern, he used to always be involved with DC Comics. You'd always see interviews with him. He'd always talk. And, it's just like you don't hear from him anymore. He's like a recluse, and it just doesn't. He doesn't do like interviews. So you don't know what he's up to. You don't know what he's building and stuff. And it's like again, it goes into that whole secretive thing.
Yeah.
And Jim Lee's the same way. You don't hear a lot from him that much anymore. And it's like, I don't know if these guys are muzzled where they really can't talk to the press. I mean, I don't know. Jeff Johns really doesn't have good press anyway, but at the same time, you can't just ignore your fan base.
Right. Well, what's interesting in the Johns situation is that he's really a freelancer at this point. So
yeah, that's true too.
He doesn't answer to anybody, but maybe Warner said, hey, for right now, we want you to keep a low profile because of all the heat. If you go online and say anything, people are just going to dogpile on you over everything that's going on between the Ray Fisher stuff. And I mean, this article made it look like, he's the one that brought Josh Whedon in, and it certainly looks that way, that he brought Josh Whedon in. Because he was working, again, according to this Vanity Fair article, Jeff Johns brought Joss Whedon in to work on a Batgirl movie, and he helped bring Joss Whedon over to work on Justice League because Warner Brothers was afraid of the tone and was afraid of how Zack's Zack Snyder's Batman vs. Superman didn't go as well as they thought it would. They were very nervous. So Jeff Johns was one of a couple of different people who were on the set. One of them had to be on set every day kind of thing. And so they were trying to lighten the tone and so on. And if you haven't read that article, it's very interesting. But, it obviously didn't put Johns, without pointing fingers at Johns, it didn't necessarily put him in the best light. And you've, of course, got the continued criticisms coming from different people on Twitter. So I can see why he might be laying low.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the smart thing to do.
Yep. So speaking of Jeff Johns, we have a retro review we're going to do in this episode. We're going to be talking about Green Lantern #9. I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about it because it's Hal Jordan teaming up with Batman.
Well, and I will say this, it's a good story.
It is. And so we'll take a quick break. We've got a Know Your Core segment to do, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about Green Lantern #9.
All right, fellow Owens, welcome to another segment of Know Your Core. This week, we have a peculiar one. It goes by the name of Penn Maricc. Penn Maricc, his first appearance was in Tales of the Green Lantern Corp annual issue number 2 from 1986, created by Mindy Newell and George Freeman. He hails from Space Sector 3333. Penn has a tendency to tell hyperbolic tall tales about his life as he swills the finest ale. The mercenary Penn Maricc is a Green Lantern who punches first and scans for answers later. Some time ago, Penn made a lifelong enemy of Guy Gardner. Several people have asked what caused the rift between them, but only they two know the truth. And just like that, another segment of the Know Your Core, and an interesting character in Penn Maricc, which makes roughly about 5 appearances throughout the Green Lantern lore.
To tell you the story of Green Lantern is to tell you the story of the birth of a universe, the origins of DC as a whole.
It's a magic emerald meteor from space in the 1940s.
It's the establishment of the JSA.
It's the birth of the Silver Age.
It's the introduction of a universal police force.
It's the formation of the JLA.
It's the emergence of the multiverse.
It's a crisis in both space and time.
It's an emerald dawn.
And it's an emerald twilight.
It's the brightest day.
And the blackest night.
And the Lantern cast covers all of this and everything in between. We're Green Lantern's greatest advocates and fiercest critics. We've been fans for years, and it's the reason we're self-proclaimed Lanternologists.
So find us on iTunes and Stitcher and give us a listen, because the history of Green Lantern really is the history of the DC Universe. And we've got the interviews, commentaries, reviews, and more to back it up.
All right, my friends. So we're talking about Green Lantern #9 from the Jeff Johns run. And this was a chance for Jeff Johns to revisit the dynamic between Hal Jordan and Batman, because the last time the two of those guys got together was during Green Lantern Rebirth, and Hal clocked Batman, infamously at the end of the story. And so this time around, this is Batman recruiting Hal to help him solve a mystery of the Tattooed Man. And this version of Tattooed Man is a brand new version. This is his first appearance. And this guy's name is Mark Richards. Whole different take on the Tattooed Man. The Tattooed Man from the classic Green Lantern run is in jail at this point. He's tried to go straight. Not working well for him there. He couldn't give up his life of crime as easily as he thought he could. And this guy's a little bit different. He's a military person he's a former U.S. Marine. He went missing a few years ago, and he's learned to do this tattoo process called sin grafting. Not skin grafting, but sin grafting. And so his whole thing is he absorbs the sins of the other person in a tattoo that goes on him, and then, like the old Tattooed Man, he can bring those tattoos to life. But he carries their sins with them, essentially redeeming them, which is kind of a cool take. And this version of the Tattooed Man stuck around for a while. He stuck around through Final Crisis and Infinite Crisis and through Brightest Day. He survived all the way up to Heroes in Crisis, and then Tom King killed him. He was one of the patients at Sanctuary that was killed by Wally West.
Poor guy. And you got to hand it to Ethan Van Sciver with this issue on that art with all his tattoos too.
Yeah, this really gave him a chance to cut loose. I know Ethan Van Sciver is a divisive character because of the things that he says and his involvement in the comics geek movement, but the man can draw.
Oh yeah,
you can't take that away from him. But this issue starts out with someone being chased by a saber-toothed tiger through Gotham City. And he tries to get away in a blimp, and then a skull with bat wings basically pulls him out of the blimp, and he falls to his death. And the new tattooed man is then showed with his new look. And basically, he's got a tattoo gun, and he's about to make a tattoo. And he tattoos on his victim. He's basically turned himself into a mercenary who's a killer for hire, but he's also killing bad people and supposedly absolving of their sins and making himself stronger in the as a reward, essentially, on top of getting paid, which is really a neat twist.
Oh, I completely agree. I think it's cool how I just think he looks pretty cool. That one page where it's branded and it shows his hand with the barbed wire on it.
Yeah.
This is a great looking image of this guy.
And it's neat that you bring up the barbed wire because he actually uses that later on in this issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just really a neat look. You know, he's looks like he's got hundreds of different tattoos there, and he not only brands the person with kind of what their crime is, almost like a scarlet letter of sorts, which is really a neat take. But before we get more into the story, Hal goes to Oa. He's on Oa. And he's broken his power battery. He's taken the power battery. If you recall, he just got in dealing with the shark. And the shark bit down on the power battery and it exploded. So Hal's taking his power battery back to Oa for a replacement. He takes a bit of stick from Salak and what's the other guy's name? Shorm. And Shorm and Salak give him a little bit of grief for the destruction of the power battery. And basically, Salak makes the comment that the power battery cost over 170 million American dollars to replace, and Hal's like, take it out of my paycheck.
He's a real smart aleck. This whole conversation, he's just real flippant about his attitude. I thought it was interesting that what Salak says about among the new 7.2 thousand appointed Green Lanterns.
Salak says, I want to share something with you. It's something unpleasant, and so the two of them kind of go for a fly. And he's like, I'm not talking to you in my official capacity. I'm talking to you as a friend. And basically, these new recruits are hearing what you did as your time as Parallax. You better watch your back, which is kind of setting the stage. It seems out of place in the context of this issue. But when we get to the next arc, that comes back into play. It's basically a little bit of foreshadowing by Jeff Johns.
Right.
And then one of the best parts, Hal goes to the Batcave. And basically, and you can see there's still tension between Bruce and Hal. And that, Green Arrow says you wanted to see me. You could have just called me yourself. You have my number. And Batman says, well, Ollie's is still on speed dial. So it's a very cold reception that Hal gets, and
he calls him Jordan too.
Yeah, he won't call him Hal; he calls him Jordan. Yeah, exactly. He still has not quite forgiven Hal for what's gone on, and I'm sure he doesn't forgive him for the punch. But Batman had it coming, so
agreed. Happily agreed.
So Bruce kind of gives him the lowdown as to this new tattooed man. And he talks, Hal looks at the picture and says, well, this isn't Abel Tarrant. He's in Blackgate. And so he gets the kind of the history, which does a nice job of informing the reader. Here's a new version of Tattooed Man. Here's where he comes from. This is his identity. You get just enough information so that you know everything you need to know going into the rest of it. And he gives Hal the job of bringing him in. And so Hal's thinking, hey, we're going to team up. Let's go out and get him. And Batman says, well, I got other things to do.
Yeah.
And again, calls him Jordan, and he reminds me, you used to call me Hal. And then Batman is like, I'm not getting into this. He just says the tattooed man is waiting. And it's interesting because he says to Hal, you wanted to put the ring back on and play happy superhero. I'm giving you that chance. And Hal says, "Hey, I'm not Robin or a member of the Justice League. I'm a Green Lantern." And your scary big act, and he puts his arm on Bruce's shoulder, and now it's Batman's chance to return the favor. He clocks Hal.
Big time.
Or as I'd like to think of it, Hal lets Batman hit him.
Yeah, we'll go with that. It makes no sense.
So Batman says we're even, and Hal's like, "Okay, I'm good with that. Now let's go catch the bad guy together."
I mean, it is fair. I mean, fair is fair. You know, I mean, we all have our good days when we praise like the most glorious panel of Hal punching out Batman. But fair is fair, and Batman gets him back in this one, and you know, I'm cool with that. You know, as is Hal. You know, Hal's like, "Fine, you got me, whatever."
Yeah, he's not carrying any, he's not carrying any baggage over it. He's like, "Let's go get the bad guy." So the two of them are riding in the Batmobile, and there's a little bit more back and forth between the two as Hal's talking about how tight the passenger seat is because it's set up for Robin, and then
he glows.
Yeah, he glows. He glows extra brightly, and I think this scene is nice because it really kind of talks about how Hal broaches things and how Batman does, and you get to see a little bit more about why does Hal go in big and bright. And the reason why, and he comes right out and explains it, and he says, "I want them to see me because if they charge at me instead of someone else, then they're not going to get hurt. It's easier to draw them out than to go hunting," which is the exact opposite of Batman.
Yep, that's right.
So there's the funny scene where Batman says, "You got any thoughts about how you're going to bring the tattooed man down?" And Hal just says, "I'm going to hit him really big, really hard with a big green boxing glove." And Batman just shoots him a look, and he's like, "I'm kidding."
That is a cool look, that panel right there.
Yeah, it's neat. And basically the plan is Batman's going to be Batman, Hal's going to be Hal. Hal's going to go in there, lights ablazing, "Hey, come out and get me," and stuff, and distract Tattooed Man, and then Batman's going to beat the crap out of him.
And then the next page, in typical Hal fashion,
he's there with the bright spotlights are going, and he's got a whole little laser light show going on, and of course Tattooed Man was expecting Batman, but Hal's there and he's going to come out with your hands up and save yourself some trouble. Tattooed Man comes out, unleashes a bunch of tattoos. Now, if I recall, I don't think the original Tattooed Man really did more than one tattoo at a time.
Yeah, he threw them all at him this time.
Yeah, he throws a bunch at him, and Hal's trying to absorb it as Batman does his "I'm going to sneak up behind the guy and beat the crap out of him" routine. And Hal does a really neat dragon construct, and you see the barbed wire coming off the guy's arms. And Hal's getting pretty bloodied over it because he's taking a lot of damage. He's basically playing the tank, essentially.
It's worth noting in this issue that there's there's a lot of ads for comic books in there, which was kind of cool. I missed those,
Yeah.
But there's also a promo for the Rand Denegar War that has Ion on the front.
Oh, yeah. And this was right before Infinite Crisis. So after this book, everything kind of jumps forward a year after this issue, which is why it feels a little like filler, because it doesn't really go into, you're getting ready to go into one year jump. You can't start a new big plot.
Yeah.
So it's a one and done. But it's neat. You get to see some really neat imagery. You think it's to draw some big scorpions and creatures and serpents and stuff. Some really cool looking imagery. But you see the new Tattooed Man saying, "I see sin in you," and Hal says, "Yeah, me and the next guy." And Hal's getting mauled pretty badly, but he absorbs it, and then Batman sneaks up behind him and says "boo," and they get into a bit of a fight. He's a little bit more than Batman I think was expecting, because he absorbs the initial fight, and so they get into a prolonged fight while Hal is continuing to absorb damage.
Which has to be one of the coolest lines Batman says when he says, "I see your sins too, Batman. You have so many." Good, say hello for me. yeah,
it's a cool moment. I think it's a neat dynamic because these are two characters that are opposites, and the Tattooed Man is a good foil for the two. And it's interesting because this version of the Tattooed Man is almost a Batmanized version of the classic Green Lantern villain, if you think about how Johns kind of recreates the character here. So it's a good mix. But they catch the guy, and Hal ends the team up by saying, "I don't usually bleed this much on a team up." And then it ends with a character scene where Hal and Batman are there, and Hal gives Batman the ring. And Hal doesn't want it. And basically he kind of says to Batman, what are you, scared of a ring? So he puts it on, and he teaches Batman a little bit about how to use the ring. And he summons, after he struggles a little bit, he creates an image of his parents. And they talk a little bit about how they're similar and how they both deal with the pain of it. It's not a prolonged, it's not a dragged out conversation, but it's a meaningful one.
It is. And that last page is really, really sets in because, Batman shows that, I don't know. I'm not big into his character, so I can't speak for the fan base, but he's always been the harbinger that's held on to his parents' death. And, whether he gets retribution for it or not, he still doesn't stop what he's doing, And it feels to me like at this point, even Batman, even if he could and had the ability to overcome that part that's hanging on his conscience, I guess you can say, he doesn't want to, because that's what drives him as a character, is having that fuel, having the death of his parents hanging over his shoulders, or the fear of it, or, the grief of it that still hangs with him. And that's what it says, not yet,
I think one of the things about his character is that he doesn't want to give it up for a couple of reasons. One, it fuels him, and two, I don't think he knows how to live without it.
And that's a good point too. That actually makes more sense, because you're right. I mean, it's all he's ever known, It's just it's a cool moment, and they come together, and for the record, I'm glad you're back, and he calls him Hal.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, he doesn't know how to live without that pain. And I think he's got the universe's biggest case of survivor guilt. So,
yeah.
But a neat little one and done story. And then we're going to jump, when we talk next time about this series, we're going to jump, I think it's about a year into the future or so, after Infinite Crisis. So it's interesting, but it was a good issue. I enjoyed it. Again, it was a one and done. There was going to be an inevitable team up between Hal and Bruce. And I think, when you think about it, something had to be done to clear the air between these two characters if they're ever going to team up on the Justice League or do anything together. You needed to deal with this baggage that had been created. So I think it's effective from that standpoint too.
Worth noting, didn't Ion come out around this time? The Ion comics?
I'm not sure.
What year was this? This was
2005.
I think Ion came out in 2006.
It might have been right around the same time. This might have been, we're 9 issues in. I don't remember when in 2005 the series started. So this could have been early 2006.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, good solid issue. And, I was flipping through it. It's a digital copy, but, it has all the ads for all the books in here, man. Teen Titans, not that I'd read it, but like the Ranthanagar War. I mean, they have all kinds of stuff in here. JSA by Paul Levitz. You don't see that many ads for books anymore.
No. This I just looked it up while we were talking. This came out in April of 2006.
Okay, so it's. Oh, I wonder what Ion came around that time. I think. I don't know. I have to search it.
It might have. And it's yeah. And this had an interesting a variant cover by Simone Bianchi. Actually, that wasn't the variant cover. That was the main cover. And it's this neat picture of Hal and Batman kind of going at it.
And then the other cover is the one with Batman and the Green Lantern outfit. With I don't know what he looks like. It's the whole cover's got him on the. I don't know if you've seen it, right? You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. I forgot what he's called.
It basically is him wearing the Batman Green Lantern hybrid outfit that they came up with.
That's a better way to put it.
But it's cool. All right. Well, let's take a quick pause, and when we come back, we've got some listener feedback.
Excellent.
All right, welcome back to the podcast of OA. Phil, I don't know about you, but my Power Ring is blinking. It looks like you've got some messages that have come in. So, Power Ring, go ahead and let us know about the first message.
Our first comment is from the Shadow of Batman via YouTube. He is commenting about the Green Lantern, Season 2, Issue 11 from our last episode. Playing in 3, 2, 1.
Good stuff. Sad to see this end. It is such a love letter to the mythos from John Broome to Jeff Johns. Speaking of Johns, one of the great things this run brought to the table was reminding audiences that GL doesn't always have to be a world-ending emotional spectrum war. It was nice to see GL be a space cop again in a modern context. Sad to see Thorne seem to go back to the shock value someone will die world-ending plot. Especially when Morrison set the standard that GL can be a book about big ideas with smaller-scale stories. Hope I'm wrong. I hope Thorne can pull through with at least his first story arc, but I won't hold my breath.
Well, thanks, Shadow Batman. I appreciate the comments. I agree with you. I think that this Morrison run is very much a love letter to everything from John Broome's through the Jeff Johns era, and even in some of the Venditti stuff. I think he kind of tries to incorporate it all. I think it's a neat amalgamation of all the different versions of Hal that we've seen over the years. And I also think the same thing. One of the things that the Jeff Johns era gets some criticism for, especially near the end, was that everything seemed to be an event. And the whole Morrison run has been, even though it's a big, there are big stakes, there have been some very smaller scale stories, as you said. So I think that's really, I agree with everything you're saying. And I'm not sure what I think about the Thorne thing. I've seen it when we've seen a couple of issues solicited, and I've already gone on record. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm not buying it. So we'll see. I'm going to read it for reviews, but I'm not buying it. Phil, what do you got to say?
Well, I think in this Grant Morrison run, the thing that makes this stand out to me is he put a lot of thought and a lot of history into the characterization of Hal Jordan during the first these two seasons, if you want to call it that. They paid a lot of homage to past artists and past writers, for that matter, by delving into the Lantern mythos and bringing that content forward, in a modern context. And I think Morrison has done a wonderful job doing so. Complementing with Sharp's art. They've just been a 1-2 tandem that's just been, just mind-boggling. Sharp's art has changed. If you go back to the first issue, and go through each issue just to look at the art, you can see how his art's come along, just page by page, book by book. And, and that's one thing that's noteworthy about this when it's collected. If it ever comes out in a hardcover collected trade with both seasons, I'll buy it, because it's going to look good sitting on a shelf. As far as the Thorne goes, I don't know. I don't know much about the guy, other than the criticisms that he throws out about Hal Jordan. And, I throw criticisms out about Batman, but it's more in a joking manner. It's not to get people to not read or to not go out and like Batman or anything like that. It's just me being a fan, But if I'm a content creator like Thorne, you can't just because you don't like something, but you got a fan base that does, a greater part of your fan base, you can't just be dismissive of it and be critical of it, thinking that you're gonna win that fan base on your part to read your book. Especially when, I hate to say it, both future states, both those Stewart storylines that started out they were flat to me. So don't know. We'll see. I don't have high hopes either, but I'm going to give it a fair shake. And, and you and I both collectively, we've got a lot of Green Lantern stuff that we've read over the course of the years, and, we'll be good barometers for where we think the series stands as opposed to other stuff we've read prior. That's my take on it. That's a lot. It was winded, but had to get it off my chest. All right. Well, I guess Ring, play that next message, huh?
Our next comment is from JP via YouTube. He is also commenting about the Green Lantern, Season 2, Issue 11 from our last episode. Playing in 3, 2, 1.
I hope Morrison is making an argument for Hal's importance, and that DC recognizes it.
Well, JP, Green Lantern, issue number 11. I would think it wouldn't take much to make an argument that Hal is important, not only in the Green Lantern universe, but on the whole DC universe. I mean, he has a following, and it goes back many, many years. So I hope you're right. I hope DC recognizes it. I think they should. If they don't, they're blind. What do you think, Myron?
Oh, absolutely. Do you look at? I'll have to ask you this question, Phil. Do you look at Green Lantern as an ensemble cast, or do you look at it as a book or a series where one character is always the lead and everybody else is kind of supporting cast?
I mean, I would much rather see it as an ensemble cast, but you're always going to have a leader, Of course, you're going to have your more popular characters, and I understand that, but again, I always seen the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, it is a corps as an ensemble cast, I mean, but of course you're going to have standout characters like Hal Jordan or Simon Baz for that matter, or Jessica Cruz. That you're going to have your fan base that attaches to it. And, the unfortunate thing about that is, that's all they're in for is that one character. They don't want to read about anybody else. If the book doesn't include the one they like, more often than not, what are you going to do? You're not going to read that book.
Right.
Why would you read a book that doesn't have your favorite Lantern in it? Now, you and I are Green Lantern Corps fans. Now, we just so happen to like Hal Jordan a lot. I like Cruz a lot. But at the same time, we're still going to read the content for the content itself. Does it necessarily... that's what makes it an ensemble liking for us as fans. I don't know, with the Thorn run starting with John Stewart and stuff, I'm curious to see what he's going to do with John Stewart, but I don't have a lot of invested time in John Stewart to make him a character that, I can recognize with, or I can attach to, and I think that's a character better reserved for John Stewart fans out there. I just hope other ones are in there, like, Hal Jordan and Rayner and stuff.
Right. I've never really looked at Green Lantern as an ensemble book. Now, the exception to that being there was a time back in the 80s when they kind of took Green Lantern books and boiled it down to one book again, and you had Hal and John living together with Katmatui and so on, and they tried to make it an ensemble book. And I don't think it did as good of a job. I think the only time I've really seen it effectively written was during the Robert Venditti era when he did the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps book. I thought he did the best job of balancing the cast of 4 characters and each one of them getting their moments to shine. But I'll be honest, I've always looked at the Green Lantern franchise as it's built on Hal's shoulders, and Guy was created as a one-shot appearance to reinforce why Hal was the right person for the ring. John was created as a backup. He was created as a supporting character. So when you started, it was really built that way. So I never saw any of the other characters as being on the same level at all.
Makes sense.
But then when you got to, obviously, Emerald Twilight, the playing field was completely changed. When you look at before, all the villains you saw, they were Hal's villains. There for a while they had John Stewart working at Ferris Aircraft because he was almost more of a supporting character than his own character. So I think that's where some of this comes along problematically, is that it's never been portrayed in any other way, really, other than the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps book in the last 20 some odd years. So you've got that dynamic going on, but then the problem you've got so many characters now that it's hard to have an ensemble cast, and you don't have panel time to devote to anybody but the Earth Lanterns. So characters like Kilowog and Salak, who are fan favorite characters, they're relegated to background characters only because all the lines of dialogue are given to Earth characters because there are so many. One of the things I heard Thorne say was that his story was pitched to be a John Stewart only story, and that he is being told to use Joe Mullane and Kelly Quintana and Simon Baz. Those weren't his choices. That's DC saying, okay, we like your story, but we want you to do these things too. So those characters are in there not by his choice. But the problem I see is that the Green Lantern Corps concept kind of fades away because we've got too many Earth Lanterns in a book. I really miss the days when it was just Hal and the aliens, because you got to see all of these really cool characters and they all got time to be developed a little bit. So I don't know, to me it was much richer at this point because you didn't have so many Earth Lanterns. But that's just my perspective. I've been reading GL since the 70s, and so I'm very much an old school reader. I'm used to what I grew up with and what I've read most of my life. And so I have a real hard time letting this become something that it wasn't designed to be, or that I feel it should be, quite honestly. But I think, getting back to JP's comments, I wonder if that's what Morrison is doing. Is he trying to make a comment about how characters like Hal are important to DC Comics and comics in general because of what they represent? Or is he using it as a meta comment about his own place in the comic book industry, because some people look at him as someone that we don't need around so much anymore? In fact, supposedly this is his last superhero book. So I don't know. I don't know whether it's just meta commentary, if it's commentary about Hal and 21st century comic book industry. Is it both? Is it neither? I think one of the things about Morrison's stuff is that it leaves it up to you as the reader to decide. But certainly you can see where there's the opportunity for different commentary. But I appreciate the comment. Obviously, our responses were longer than JP's comment, but I think it's a good comment to bring about. So Power Ring, go ahead and give us the next one.
This one is from Chris. He is commenting about Athmora. Playing in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, I just heard the discussion of Athmora. I recognize the name as being so close to Bethmora, an imaginary fantasyland city from a story by Lord Dunsany from 1910. I wonder if they were inspired by this to use it in Green Lantern in 1962. Looking it up just now, I see that Bethmora Place was also reused in Hellboy.
Hey Chris, thanks for the comment about Athmora. I did not know about Bethmora, so that's interesting. I'm going to have to go back and do some looking up about some of this stuff. I don't know whether they used that as inspiration back in the Green Lantern book, back when they showed Athmora the first time. I'm not sure. I there's really not much written about that period, but it wouldn't surprise me. And it's interesting, as you pointed out, to see Bethmora used in Hellboy. Whether it's related or not, I don't know. Maybe Athmora and Bethmora are sister planets.
I had no idea. That's real. I'm gonna do some research into that myself. Even if it wasn't inspiration to put it in there, I'm just kind of wondering who this Lord Dunsany is from 1910. That's it. It'd be. I'm gonna look into this for a little bit further too, because I want to get some context behind this. But it's interesting that, I mean, it's kind of cool that a reader would deduce that from a namesake, Huh.
Well, it's cool. It's one of the things I love about Green Lantern fandom is people pick up on this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, cool fans. All right, Ring. Let's see. I think we got they got one more message. Go ahead. I got a couple more messages. Go ahead and play it, Ring.
Our next comment is about Future State, Green Lantern number 2. It's from John O. is Good via YouTube. Playing in 3, 2, 1.
This Jon Stewart story was like a generic Star Trek away team episode.
All right, John O. And yeah, that's pretty much how I feel. I mean, it was a one and done. It wasn't earth shattering. It didn't. I'll be honest with you. It did absolutely nothing for me at all whatsoever. Reading, and furthermore, I'd probably never ever read it again. I don't know your thoughts, Myron.
Yeah, I mean, when you and I talked about it, I think we pretty much got our feelings out there about it. But it's interesting, after we talked about it, I went back out and I looked at more reviews and stuff, and people who liked the issue, they didn't like it for the Jon Stewart story. Pretty much universally, people didn't care for it. So yeah. I love the analogy of a generic Star Trek away team episode. You're very right. It was just very It was just kind of there. It was a story, but I don't want more to say than that. So Power Ring, we got one more left. Go ahead and play it for us.
Our last comment is from Mark. It's also about Future State, Green Lantern number 2. Playing in 3, 2, 1.
I actually got into the John Stewart story more in Future State 2, but I am very distracted by the art. I just don't like it. In answer to Myron's question, was that maybe a hologram John Stewart produced of the God in Red, by that box they were working on? I really hope Jessica Cruz gets her own story sometime soon.
Well, I'm glad, Mark, that you enjoyed it. I'm glad you got into it more. You may be one of the only people that did, but I'm glad that you did. And we joke about it a little bit and we're critical of it, but we hope that people that enjoyed it don't feel that we're criticizing them in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't for me, and the art wasn't for me. I agree with you, Mark. The art was. It's hard to talk about art sometimes because art is very subjective, and I couldn't draw as good as that guy drew, but at the same time it made my eyes hurt. So, and it's not.
I mean, if you want to set the tone for art, put his art, that person's art from the Future State, and juxtapose it next to Liam Sharp, and it's like, I mean, that's two very distinct, different styles of artistic impression. But what you have to realize is, I'll go to the Sharp one because I think it's gorgeous. I won't go to the other one because it doesn't look that good. The next person might not feel the same way, that's how art has always been. I mean, it's not for everybody.
No,
not every artist is for everybody, and everybody out there, I guarantee you, has different likes as far as their favorite artists go when it comes to these books. Everybody, I'm no different.
Yeah,
I know you're not.
Some people may have liked the artwork, and more power to them. I just think it's a case of people like what they like. They like certain kinds of art styles, and some art styles don't go well with them. To me, the disappointing thing was when you go back and look at that book, Dexter Soy's artwork was glorious, and he's drawing, I think, the first 2 issues of the new Green Lantern book, but then it's going to Tom Rainey, who did the artwork that we're talking about now. So
oh, I didn't know that.
So I'm a little more worried than I was before that I'm not gonna like it. But we'll see. But yeah, the artwork was not a good thing, from my opinion, and from some other people's opinion. Some people liked it, So I'm not criticizing the fact that anybody might like it. It just wasn't for me, and that's okay.
Their own. That's the only phrase you can attribute to it.
That's right. All right, Power Ring, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody how they can be a part of the show?
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of OA.
The podcast of
All right, fellow Owens. Well, episode 188 in the bag. As they say now, it's put up on the net. Now, you and I collectively, got about 80 years worth of Lantern between us. And we've seen a lot.
Sorry, I got to turn my hearing aid up a little bit.
We've seen a lot, and, I sometimes look back on other episodes that you and I have recorded and stuff, and, I kind of just try to imagine what the future looks like for the character, and how many times have we sat and had discussions like this, and the common theme is we'll see, and we were speculative of the Morris run when it started. And, now we're almost 2 years in. We got 1 issue to go. And we're coming to a close on it. And now, of course, our attitudes have since changed. Now it's going on almost 2 years worth. But our attitudes have changed considerably about it. Now, looking forward, there isn't much light as far as what we're going to get when we're going to be reading Green Lantern in the months to come, And with that in mind, I got to know what Myron's thinking about for the future of the Green Lantern universe.
Well, I'm not terribly optimistic. I'll be quite frank. I guess I'll know more about how I feel when we hear more announcements.
Sure.
But if the only book we're going to get is the Jeff Thorne book, the last time I jumped off Green Lantern was shortly after Kyle Rayner. I gave Kyle Rayner a year, and it wasn't for me. I know I don't want to tick off Kyle Rayner fans, but I already read Spider-Man, and Lee and Ditko did it better in my book. So I didn't have any connection to the Kyle Rayner character. Didn't work for me. So I gave him a year or so to see if it was going to be something I would like. It just wasn't. So I walked away from comics altogether for quite a while. I don't think I came back until I started hearing about Jeff Johns' name and his run on JSA, and that got me like, well, let me try it, take a look and see. And I really liked his JSA run, not knowing that he would ultimately end up being the guy to come back and do Green Lantern. But that got me into comics a little bit, and so I was on the periphery for a while, and it got me back into it. And I think I've been around long enough to know that everything is cyclical. And if this is a part of the downside for me as a fan, then it is. I hope there's an upside. I get to experience one more upside before I move on from this plane. Because nobody knows how long they're going to be around, but we're all getting older. And sure. I hope that there's something to enjoy for me. I really want to see how Jordan. My thing as a fan is I want people to look at how Jordan is a character the way that I look at him as a character. Or people weren't really fans of Iron Man until the movie came out. Iron Man was not. He was a B-list character, and now people have come to find out what fans of Iron Man have always loved about Iron Man. And I want the same thing for Green Lantern. The problem as I see it is DC keeps changing their focus or direction, that people aren't going to have a chance to fall in love with some of these iconic characters because they're too busy changing them. And I'm not a fan of that. I don't agree with some of the things that are going on with some of the comic book characters and how they're being changed radically to suit a modern audience, but abandoning things about them that are critical to their character or are part of what made the character something that somebody loved. And that's just me editorializing.
Right.
So I don't know what the future is going to bring. I hope that John Stewart fans that are looking at this run is something that's John Stewart finally getting his chance to be the lead guy. I hope that they enjoy the ride. But the problem always is, as we've seen time and time again over the history of things, is that when the book doesn't sell, eventually it'll come back to Hal, because while all the other characters are a Green Lantern, Hal is the Green Lantern. And I don't mean to say that in a cocky way or anything, but that's the reality of it. And every time that DC goes away from that and they try something else for a while, it doesn't, Kyle Rayner, God love him, 10 years. That's longer than anybody else was able to go. I mean, you had periods of time in the past when John was the main Green Lantern, and it didn't last long, and Guy was the main Green Lantern, and that didn't last long. So, I worry sometimes about the franchise, because the more Earth Lanterns they add to the mix, the more difficult it makes for the fan base. It pits fan against fan, and it's not a good look for anybody. So, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm optimistic in some ways, and I'm very pessimistic in others. So we'll see.
Only time will tell, friend.
Right. It's the infamous "we'll see." We say that a lot. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
So, my friends, thanks for listening. Thanks again for making us a part of your fan experience. We will be back in a couple of weeks to be talking about the last issue of the Morrison run.
Oh, it's going to be a sad day.
For some people who aren't loving it, they'll be glad it's over.
Yeah, that's also true.
I think this is a series that I hope is someday collected in an omnibus or absolute format book. I'd love to see it as an absolute book, just because it'd be a big absolute book, but they did a whole absolute for Blackest Night, so they could do it for this, maybe in 2 volumes. But the absolute format with the oversized printing would make Liam Sharp's artwork just pop. So
yeah.
I'm hoping for something like that at some point. I do think it's a series that will read better in that format, and hopefully people who did like it the first time might appreciate it more the next. Well, again, the infamous "we'll see."
We'll see. You're right.
So until next time, everybody treat each other well, keep your power ring charged, and make every day your brightest day. The Podcast of Oa is the official podcast of the blog of Oa and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.